So good to look out and see your faces this morning as we come together to worship our God in spirit and in truth. If you're visiting with us, we're so glad to have you here with us on today. Please keep coming back to visit us. Today's lesson is titled, Entertaining Ourselves to Death. Entertaining ourselves to death. And here, that will make more sense to you in a moment. Just bear with me. But let's go to the passage that Wade just read here in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 6 and 7. Let me give you the background to this. Paul is warning the people of Corinth. Corinth had a lot of problems there. They were following men other than Christ. They were not growing as they should have grown. Even a man there had his own dad's wife. During the Lord's Supper, they would get drunk and just make a butchery of a mockery of the Lord's Supper. A lot of other problems that they were experiencing. And so Paul goes back into time. He goes back to these things that were written for our learning, verse number 11 of this same chapter here. And here's what he says to the people of Corinth. Now these things, talking about back in the wilderness, these things became our examples, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. And do not become idolaters, as were some of them. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Notice they did not rise up to worship God. They did not rise up to edify one another. They did not rise up to be an example to unbelievers or idolatrous people concerning the one and only true living God. Notice that they did not rise up to visit the widows and orphans in their trouble. They did not rise up to feed the poor, to clothe the naked, to visit the sick, any of that. They simply rose up to play. In our society today, many have become consumed with all sorts of entertainment, and there's a lot of it out there. Much of it is not good for Christian consumption, really not for anybody, especially a Christian, but many are consumed every day, spending hours and hours at a time just playing. Now, why should preachers speak on this topic? Well, Satan is using excessive amounts of entertainment to consume our minds. Many hearts are being hijacked, taken hostage, and driven far away from God. And we'll say some more about that later on. Even many Christians are not aware of how much we are influenced by what we see and hear. Now let me say something before I get into this, and I'll go into some passages shortly. Here I am not saying, tell you what I'm not saying. I am not saying this morning that a person cannot watch movies or go to sporting events or go out to eat or any of those kinds of things. What we're talking about is doing the wrong kinds of things, watching the wrong kinds of things. PG is not PG anymore. G is not G anymore, and all of that. And we need to be aware of these things. So is it wrong just to have a good time? Well, in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse number 22, the Ecclesiastes writers say, I have seen that nothing is better than that man should be happy in his activities, For that is his lot. For who will bring him to see what will occur after him? Also, we go on to Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and verse number 4. I have a heading here. Entertainment has its place in life, but life is not all about fun and games. There is a time to weep, but there is a time to laugh. Ecclesiastes 3:4. Overindulgence becomes the problem. Overindulgence in fun can be harmful. I recall the proverb in Proverbs chapter 25 and verse number 16. Have you found honey? Eat only as much as you need, lest you be filled with it and vomit. And that's what's going on. A lot of time people are being filled with entertainment to a point where I remember, I'm bringing some family here, some family members here. My wife and I went a few years ago and for the holidays, and sports came on at 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock at night. Sports was still going. We thought that was for the holidays, but it continued for days. After that, of course, we had to go out and do some other things other than just watch sports. But there was a preoccupation. Whenever the person's not working, some people are just playing video games for 8, 9 hours a day, never picking up their Bible, watching sports all day long, watching movie after movie after movie, and never spending time with God. But there's another issue. There's another issue here when we talk about things like TV, movies, the internet, and music and things of that nature. That we are influenced by what we see and what we hear. The enemy knows that preoccupation with various kinds of entertainment can often be used to distract us away from God and spiritual things. We talked about this on last week in 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse number 8, where the Bible says, be sober, be vigilant. What does that mean? Be watchful. Because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. And he will use such things to take us away from God. Also, our thoughts affect who and what we are. The things that are on our minds typically take form in our actions, our behaviors, and such. In Proverbs chapter 23 and verse 7, for as he, that is a man, thinks in his heart, his mind, so is he. There's an old saying, garbage in, garbage out. And if a person is often thinking corrupt things, watching corrupt movies and things like this, that's who they are. Matthew chapter 6, verse 19 and 21, Jesus reminds us, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And for some people, their heart is in the wrong place because of the things that they are watching or doing. So we are called. Also, here's another matter, to be good stewards over what God has entrusted to us. Consumer spending on digital entertainment in the United States on digital distribution reached a record of $30 billion in 2020, and up by over 21% from the previous year. You know, what came to my mind last week when I read this was that 2020 when we had the pandemic, but yet people were still purchasing their entertainment. Over the past year, Americans spent a whopping $100 billion on sports, and and over half of it on sporting events. They spent $56 billion on attending sporting events, including tickets, transportation, food, and beverages, according to the survey, which sampled over 1,000 adults. Now, once again, we're not saying anything is wrong with going to these things, but a over preoccupation with such can be a problem. The U.S. industry is expected to reach more than $825 billion by 2023, according to the 2023 Entertainment and Media Outlook. And looking into the future, of course, they're surmising this. The U.S. film entertainment industry encompasses films, movie theaters, TV subscriptions, and electronic home video production and distribution and consumption. This is not including things like nightclubs, casinos, strip bars, and other forms of entertainment that are not fitting for, especially for the Christian. Here's another matter. How many hungry children that would have been fed if people had not spent all of their money on these things? Do you think that God has an issue with this? Every day, almost 16,000 children die from hunger-related causes. That's one child every 5 seconds. America spends billions upon billions a year on entertainment, of which much of it is not fit for human consumption. Speaking spiritually, that is human consumption. Speaking spiritually, to feed one child one meal is 20 cents a day. Time that by 365 days a year, that's $73 a year to feed one child. And so the issue here, once again, is not, we're not saying a person can't have entertainment, but preoccupation with such. I'll give you an example of what I'm saying. I was a case manager for years, and I remember people coming in and they would tell us, I don't have money for bills, I don't have money for food, but we would go to their house, they had 1,000 movie channels, the latest smartphones, I kid you not, brand new hubcaps on the car, all those kinds of things. So this is misplaced priorities when a person's saying they can't buy food for their children, but yet they have all this entertainment. This is not prioritizing, is what we are talking about. Let's go to point number 3. Our minds control what we think, say, and do. So we are told by God to change our mind, to transform our minds in Romans chapter 12 and verse number 2, and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. In other words, the Christian is not to be conformed to the perversions of the world, but rather change to a spiritual mindset, not carnality, not things that are worldly and evil. I can tell you from my own experience, I used to be in the entertainment business. I used to eat, drink, and sleep it. I was void of anything spiritual in my life. Most of my mind was full of filth and all those kinds of things. So I'm talking from experience, not just watching things in the past, but the way that I live. In the entertainment business. Romans chapter 8, verse 5 through 8. For those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace, because the carnal mind is enmity against God, for it is not subject to the law of God, nor indeed can it be. So then those who are in the flesh cannot please God. those who are carnally minded cannot please God. Many sins enter in by way of inappropriate entertainment. I recall in Galatians chapter 5, verse 19 through 21, the works of the flesh, Paul said, they are evident. Now, listen to these. How many of these things, as we read them, that can you see on television? Can you see in movies, in books, in magazines, as we read through these things? How about adultery? What about fornication, sexual immorality? What about uncleanness? What about lewdness? What about idolatry? Sometimes a person's entertainment becomes their God. Sorcery. And then them Harry Potter movies. Yeah, sorcery. Hatred, contentions, jealousies, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambitions, dissensions, heresies, a lot of false teachers, right? Now, we do have some good stuff on television. We have some of our sound brethren, right, that are preaching the gospel. I want to acknowledge that. But anyway, how much murder? You know, I look at young people today. When we see young people going into schools, killing one another, well, if that's all they're watching on television, who would let the child watch Friday the 13th assault? Well, people cutting people in half and all those kinds of things. But children watch those things all of the time, and sometimes parents do not care what the children are watching. Also drunkenness. We know revelries and the like. Listen to what Paul says. Not just these things, but things that are like these things. He says, of which I tell you beforehand, just as I also told you in time past, that those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. We have to be careful what we're watching. We have to be careful concerning our children. Do we detest things that are simple? I'll say more about that in a moment. But in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 6 through 8, and turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemn them to destruction, making them an example to those who afterward would live ungodly, and delivered righteous Lot, who was oppressed by the filthy conduct of the wicked. For that righteous man dwelling among them tormented his righteous soul from day to day by seeing and hearing their lawless deeds. What is that? What is that saying? Lot was sickened. He was repulsed by the things that they were doing in that city. Number 6, have we become desensitized to what we see and hear? In 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 2, having their own conscience, he says, seared with a hot iron. We can get to a point of watching certain things that it doesn't even bother us. Doesn't bother us to hear or see these things. Let's say more about the children. What about the children? What about the children? The results of a study conducted by the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development reported, this is in 2004 and it's gotten much worse since then, that teenagers who watch a lot of television with sexual content are twice as likely to engage in sexual activity than those who watch fewer programs with sexual content. One of the researchers involved in the study said this is the strongest evidence yet that the sexual content of television programs encourages adolescents to initiate sexual activities. And the study covered 1,792 adolescents between the ages of 12 and 17. One of the studies, I didn't put it up here, but they interviewed a number of children and came back 2 years later and found out some of them had become pregnant, some of them had STD, all kinds of things. When they went back and interviewed the same children a few years later. The results of a study conducted by the Rand Corporation covering 12 to 17-year-olds in the U.S. were published in the November 2008 issue of Pediatrics. A summary of the report states groundbreaking research suggests that pregnancy rates are much higher among teens who watch a lot of TV with sexual dialogue and behavior compared with those who have tamer viewing taste. Is this shocking? Is this shocking to you? Is this shocking to me? Well, it should not be. It should not be. The Bible asks a rhetorical question. Can a person walk on hot coals and his feet not be burned? Therefore, children cannot watch such things and not be influenced by the very things that they watch. Even adults are influenced by the things that they watch. How much more so children and underage children? Let's talk about TV. Most of it is a waste of time. We know that. It can control and influence us. The television show Dexter, I never watched the show. I just gathered the research. They say have influenced a number of violent acts. I guess he was some kind of serial killer in the show. Even the filmmaker Oliver Stone agreed that the show, I was in California, he made this comment. He said if Sex in the City is teaching our young girls to be women, he said we're in trouble. A filmmaker said this. Many in the business has goals, and like I told you, I know this from experience, to make money. They don't care. They don't care what they gotta feed you to make the money. They don't care about your children. That's why we have to be careful about our children. They want to tell us what to believe. Movies like I'll say some more about the movies in a moment. Movies like Philadelphia are designed to make you feel sympathy for those who are practicing homosexuality. There was a show out years ago called Happily Divorced. A woman, a man divorced his wife. They continued to live together. He was gay. She was dating men, and it was a funny sitcom. But they made light, very light of marriage on the television show. And so, what is the problem many times, even with television today? Profanity. There's lots of violence, sex, lots of sex, even on, especially immodesty and nakedness. People have no shame anymore. Subtle, immoral type of messages. Sometimes we have to pay close attention. You ever walking around in Walmart or somewhere, you ever get up in the morning and you got a song in your head and you think, where did I get this song from? And it was just playing and you remember, but your mind picked it up. It's the same thing with the things that we watch, that we don't think is affecting us, but they are affecting us. We can become desensitized to these things as seen in the statement, and I've heard people make this statement, such things do not bother me. I've heard people say, oh, profanity doesn't bother me. Or people being nude, that doesn't bother me. Well, brother, that's a problem. If it doesn't bother us, that's the problem. That's nothing to be proud of, to say those things do not bother me. And as I said before, concerning movies, the same is true. You know this. They are designed to also not just to make money, but to influence your thoughts, how you think, and how we believe. And that in Matthew chapter 5, verse number 8, Jesus said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." What is he saying to us? Blessed are those who have cleaned up their minds. Those people with the pure thoughts shall see God. The idea of purity is ridiculed in our society. We're called self-righteous and we're trying to live right, old-fashioned and old fuddy-duddy, narrow-minded. But those who mock morality will also be laughed at one day. In Psalms chapter 37 and verse 13, the Lord laughs at him, speaking of the wicked, for he sees that his day is coming. Now, here's a little tip. If you have children that are underage, grandchildren, anything like that, there's a site called screenit.com. And you see some of the categories here: alcohol, drugs, blood, gross stuff, disrespectful, frightening, guns, weapons, all those kinds of things. You can actually screen out what your children watch. Also, if your children have things like smartphones, you can actually put software on it that will block porn sites. It will block, and you can see where your children are going. What were you doing on that game site? What were you doing on that site on how to make bombs? What were you doing on there? You know, watching that kind of stuff. But you can see where your children and grandchildren are going. I highly recommend doing those kinds of things. Also, there's the issue of music. Music has a lot of influence in people's lives. Messages come through. I remember Richard Ramirez. He's said to be influenced by the heavy metal music, and then he killed, 15 people and brutalized 12 others. And if I remember correctly, they were majorly elderly people that he was attacking, if I remember that correctly. Also, Charles Manson, murder, is said to have been possibly influenced by lyrics in a rock song, Helter Skelter. I'm not saying that the musicians wrote these songs with the intent for people to kill people, but they knew what they were saying when they wrote the songs. The same thing, some rap music also is reporting as promoting violence, referring to women in derogatory and degrading ways, and encouraging sexual immorality. Also, I recall that song by Ozzy Osbourne, a 19-year-old some years ago was sitting in the bed with earphones on. I don't know where he got the gun, but listened to the song and took the gun and blew his brains out. Just because of the song. It was called Suicide something on the song in that. So what can we do? Are you asking the question, what can we do? First of all, know yourself. I'm going to say some more about that this afternoon. Please come back. Know yourself. Some people don't know themselves. You know, 1 Corinthians chapter 10 to verse 12, the Bible says, therefore, let him who think he stand take heed, lest he fall. Some people feel very confident. We talked about that last Sunday afternoon. Or I know I got it made. I know I'm not going to make any errors. Overconfident. And become unstable. 2 Corinthians chapter 13 verse 5. Examine yourselves as to whether you are in the faith. Test yourself. Do you not know yourself that Jesus Christ is in you, unless indeed you are disqualified? Paul said, unless indeed we're not who we appear to be. We need to know ourselves. In other words, we need to know. I shouldn't be watching this because I have a problem. That's what I mean by that. Know your enemy. Know your enemy. Show me where God said that Satan's not a threat. I don't see that in the Bible. Once again, many are too overconfident. 2 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 11. Paul said, lest Satan should take advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices. We don't want to be ignorant of the things that Satan can use against us, especially in subtlety like entertainment. Hey, I'm just having a good time. Ain't hurt nobody. That kind of thinking. But he comes through the avenue of that kind of thinking. Know your allies. Let's know our friends who are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls. For he has no one to help him up. Also in James chapter 5 and verse 16. Confess your trespasses to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. Here's what I'm saying. A brother and sister go to another brother and sister, hey, I'm struggling. I'm watching stuff and I think I'm addicted to it. I'm watching things that I'm out of control. Have people that are Christians, we trying to help each other get to heaven. We ought to be able to lean on one another. When we're caught up in something that we shouldn't be caught up in. Also, know your weapon. Let's know our weapon. In Jeremiah 23:29. Is not my word like a fire, says the Lord, and like a hammer that breaks the rock into pieces? Also, in Luke chapter 4, also Matthew chapter 4, Jesus whipped Satan around, whipped him around the post with it is written, it is written, it is written. We need to know our Bible if we're going to be able to stand up against the enemy. Also know what our minds should really be on. Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8. Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever